Good evening, everybody. Welcome to a beautiful evening. Welcome to spring and welcome to Exploring Ancestral Wisdom and Healing. This is Denise King Francisco, aka Dana, along with David Cad Sturkin and Nicole Fix. Good evening, you two.
Hello.
How
Good evening.
Good evening. We just wrapped up a really fun conversation, didn't we?
Yes, we
Yeah.
did. Great.
Thank you to everyone who has registered for the Exploring Ancestral Wisdom and Healing weekend retreat in November, with the second half of that to take place in the spring of 2021. It was great to see your faces tonight via Zoom, as we're all in our homes. More often than not these days. Tonight, we are talking about exploring life's meaning with our ancestors. That's a great topic, and it was chosen by our very own Nicole Fix. Nicole, what drew you to that topic?
Well, I think, right now, especially, there's a lot of more time for like this self-reflection. But that, we're all being forced to kind of go within and to look inside ourselves for this meaning rather than finding it necessarily externally. And exploring those questions of existence, like finding the deeper meaning of who we are, what life is about. Because in the midst of devastation or anything that's really difficult, it's natural to start asking those kind of questions. So
I really like that topic. And, oftentimes we do when we find ourselves in a pinch. We might reach out to Grandma. Grandma, what would you have done? Grandpa, what would you have said? Dad, what would your angle have been on this? Kat, have you ever found yourself reaching out to your ancestors for answers?
Sure. I've mentioned numerous times that my mother often comes to me as a cardinal out in the wild, and oftentimes I will ask her questions about, help me with what's going on here. I don't understand. Do you have any wisdom for me? So absolutely.
I like that. And when she responds to you, is there a feeling? I mean, I know that you see the bird, but is there something internal that happens that lets you know that she's there and she's responding?
Yeah, for me, it's just kind of this knowing. I get this kind of sense of peace within, that she's heard me. She understood what I said, and I don't always have those aha moments at that time, but it's interesting how maybe 3 or 4 hours later, all of a sudden it'll be like, that makes sense. And so I think sometimes I want the message immediately. Others, and maybe it's not important that I get it right at that moment. Maybe there's some other things that need to happen. Sometimes it's days later. So I appreciate the fact that they also know the importance of the timing of the message.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. If you happen to be listening out there all across Grandmother Earth, the chat room is now open. So come on in. Lady Hawk, it's great to have you in the chat room with us. And we welcome everyone else to come on in and let's have a conversation. Nicole, when you're, trying to discern, trying to maybe discover a little bit about life's meaning, who do you go to? Who's your go-to person from your ancestral lineage?
So, I feel most, and if we're talking about those who, passed away, those who crossed over, it's my grandmother, someone I was very close with, growing up, who's, passed away about 3 years ago. And she was just always someone that really got me in my sensitivity and allowed space for me to just be who I was. And, someone I still like to connect with, since she's passed away. So So, and I also have that habit of calling on, my most ancient and illuminated, loving, kind, and wise ancestors too
Mhm.
for finding meaning.
Mhm.
Because I think it can be really easy to. Sometimes we get in the midst of things, and it's important to ask kind of these questions of like, why is this happening? What's going on here? Trying to explore kind of those existential questions, but being able to ask the questions of like, I don't know exactly what you said, Cad, but it was just making me think of this of like, what am I supposed to learn from this? What what am, what do I need to know? How can I be of service? Like things that are more empowering in nature. And asking that to our ancestors can be so helpful in just like digging into like who we are, what our purpose is.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I find it fascinating when we talk about ancestors, how we tend to gravitate toward those, of course, that give us, what seems like unconditional love, who are compassionate to our human plight, and we know are going to love us no matter what. And it's interesting for me as an adopted person, those times in my life when I've asked the question, for heaven's sakes, somebody give me something, give me a clue. What is going on? I don't always get it in that moment, but what I've discovered in my life is sometimes an ancestor will deliver it to me in my dreams. Kat, have you ever had that happen? An answer comes in your dreams?
That's a really good question. It's interesting. I have only once in my life had one of my family members show up in my dreams, and it was my grandfather who had already died. And actually, the thing that was so interesting about it was because it was something that had never happened before, I was startled. I was startled and I woke right up. So, um, yeah, I mean, it was fascinating that he came, and I wished I had paid more attention to what was going on around in the dream. But like I said, as soon as I saw him, it startled me so much that I was right awake.
Wow.
But yeah, that was a really interesting experience because I've never had someone, one of my ancestors, well, at least that I know of. So I should specify that. There may have been someone from my distant past that showed up that I wasn't aware of. So
That's wonderful. It's amazing that when we call out how our ancestors, they really do respond. They really do say, hey, we're being called, we're needed. And they do respond. And sometimes it's in the waking hour, sometimes it can be a daydream, it can be a sign that we're given, a synchronicity that happens. It can happen through a thought that suddenly comes to us. There are so many ways that ancestors respond to our clarion call for, what's it all about? What is going on? Give me a clue. The chat room is filling up very quickly, as it does every month for this show. And Linda, Holly, Del Marie, Lily, Lady Hawk, it's so good to have you in the chat room. And share with us, who is it that you reach out to? How do your ancestors respond when you're looking for an answer? Oftentimes, what I've noticed for myself is that I can also be given a sign. And there are a couple of songs that I know that give me very clear signs that somebody is saying, at the very least, I'm with you, you're not alone. Do you ever get signs like that, Nicole?
Yes, and speaking of this, it's kind of flashing into mind when this whole COVID-19 thing hit, and just the fear and the unknown and everything that came up. I just kept having this Catholic hymn play in my head, which I don't think I've talked about this before on this last time at least. But just it was this Catholic hymn. I was not raised Catholic. I married a Catholic, but it's the song "Be Not Afraid."
Oh yeah.
You know that hymn, I'm sure, because you are Catholic or were raised Catholic.
Yep.
But "Be Not Afraid," and it was so out of nowhere. It was unexpected. It's not anything that's been in my conscious field for years. And it was so poignant in the sense that, like, that's exactly what I needed to hear. It's like, you don't have to be afraid right now. There's something, far greater happening here, and just be present in the trust that, everything's going to be okay. So yeah, and that's meaningful, right?
Mhm.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting, Nicole, that you're bringing that up. Things that I've found during this time of great uncertainty. I feel like I'm calling on my ancestors more because I know that they have previously gone through times of great uncertainty, the Great Depression, world wars. They've experienced things, a lot of these things, that the crises that we're experiencing and have experienced in our lifetimes. And I feel like I'm asking them more for help with trying to cope with this. Because I'll admit, there are times that I get so overwhelmed with the uncertainty of all of this that's going on right now that I get very emotional. And so, and oftentimes it's just a calming feeling that I receive, that kind of almost feels like that little pat on the back or that little pat on the head that everything's going to be okay, as you said. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I find that I am calling out to my ancestors more during this time because I need the wisdom that they have to offer me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Lady Hawk is sharing that she calls on her mom and also one person that isn't an ancestor, but someone that she trusts from the other side when she's needing a little assistance or clarity. And Lily is sharing, more recently, I have also incorporated calling in my most illuminated ancestor. I know for sure that I have a great grandmother who has always been present and watching over me. I never knew her, but in the beginning of my spiritual journey, she would come through in different readings I would have. And that is both of those are great points. Sometimes we do have those that come through that may not be part of the bloodline, but that do come through with information that helps us. And to Lily's point, sometimes it's an ancestor that we never met. Yes. That we don't recall, that maybe we haven't seen since another incarnation, perhaps, that answers the call for help.
Interesting. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I know for myself, one of the songs that I hear when I know that my ancestors are with me is, of course, Ray Charles singing "Georgia on My Mind," or Gladys Knight and the Pips taking a midnight train to Georgia, right? And so I've been hearing those songs forever, and it wasn't really until very recently that I understood really the depth of that. And so there are so many ways that the ancestors reach out to us, and sometimes ancestors will connect with somebody else and say, "Hey, will you get a message too?" Nicole, have you ever had that happen?
To get a message to someone?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't think of anything like right off the bat, but I feel like I am thinking of something off the bat. Like, just a coworker once, when she was talking about, I think, her deceased husband, and I just had this inner knowing, right? This sense, and then there was this like little puppy present, like that was barking around all yipping, and I asked her about it, and ended up giving her this beautiful message from her, husband, who was since deceased, and her little dog too. And so, yeah, and that's a gift to be able to share, isn't that?
Well, it really is. And right now, a lot of people are saying, what's it all about? Good Lord, what's going on? And, my sister Barb always says, I'm sitting here on my pity pot, which usually means she's sitting on top of her freezer in her kitchen, and she's calling, just to share some things. And then she'll say, "Yeah, but do you want to hear something funny, or do you want to know something good that happened?" But sometimes what I find useful about that whole thought about the pity pot is that I can think to myself, "Man, could things get any worse?"
Uh,
Right? And then you
Yes.
do maybe start to think about what your ancestors went through,
yeah, yeah,
what they had to literally endure in order to just survive.
yeah, yeah,
And that really gets me off my pity pot really quick for myself when I
yeah.
think about what some of my ancestors endured in order for me to even be here. You ever have one of those moments of illumination, Cad?
Yeah. um, yeah, I mean, I think specifically in relationship to just knowing um, about what some of the Irish people experienced as they came from Ireland during the Great Potato Famine, um, and pretty much became slaves here um, in the New World. Um, you know, leaving everything that they had, stable life and things like that to come here and to be, to experience slavery.
Mm-hmm.
It's overwhelming sometimes for me to think about what they gave up in order to come, thinking that they were going to have a better life, and actually it turned out for many of them worse than what they come from. Yeah,
Yeah. And it's not that, we negate our feelings or, moments in our lives where things are bad. They are just rotten. And we all, I think it's pretty important that we feel those things and we acknowledge those things. So it's not that I'm saying that we just keep on rolling without stopping to, think about our own circumstances and what's going on. But oftentimes, after I've done all of that, and as a good quadruple Scorpio that I am, I can do that quite well. Um, then I can sit and I can think about some things. And that's usually where I find my strength.
yeah,
And for me, when the ancestors check in, for me, in my dreams or they come through in spirit, it's where I find my strength. It's where I find my compassion. And I think that that's really the source. And sometimes it doesn't have to be a message. Sometimes it can be the presence, and that presence helps me find my courage and my strength and my compassion. What about you, Nicole?
Yeah, and I'm just thinking of that, and there's so many our ancestors have lived through. Like Cad was saying, the Great Depression, the World Wars, famine, poverty, um, and life was hard, and life is hard. And we're experiencing right now the depths of hardness that maybe a lot of us haven't experienced before in many ways. And being able to sit with those emotions and be present with them while also knowing we have the strengths of those who've gone before us, right? Their fortitude, their determination, their resilience, those are all present within us as well. And having room for all of it, having room for the pain and suffering that we're experiencing personally, but also the knowledge that we can get through it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Linda Grizak is sharing, I was reminded of the potato famine and the Great Depression from my ancestors when feeling a recent despair. And yes, Dana, it helps you find peace in all of this. Yeah, just knowing that they're there. And Holly Hagan is sharing, while not an ancestor that I know of, I can feel my guide standing next to me on my left, sending me so much love right now. Yeah.
And being able to ask for that too at times is like, gosh, I'm feeling so discouraged today. I'm feeling so lonely today. I don't, I'm praying for hopeful, like, or hope, or connection or something, or, like just asking for help and transforming that through, shifting, can be so changing in those moments, but also still, being emotionally present for whatever that emotion or that pain is.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
Not masking it and but keeping it real.
Dick talked about having signs or signs show up. I think it's interesting how in my personal situation, how the universe kind of conspired to bring Amantha into my life. And because I don't think I probably would have ever gone over to Ireland.
Wow.
And experienced Ireland like we did without Amantha.
Mm-hmm.
And so, to me, I feel like that's in many ways my ancestors working behind the scenes, bringing people into my life to help me connect with what they need me to connect with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they do conspire. And Del Marie is sharing in the chat room her example of the day. Tiblo Guy, dull knife, came through a dream that Sean, Del Marie's son, had, and you and Barb were already taking care of the problem. And so my nephew Sean had a dream in which his uncle Guy, my brother Guy Dullknife, came to him with a concern about the elders and the elderlies being taken care of during this time out on the reservation. And all the while that Guy was coming through in a dream for Sean, who relayed the message to Del Marie, Barbara and I were conspiring on this side, right, to help create a way to get assistance to the elderlies living in the outlying places of the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. And while all of that was happening, Lily out in Maryland was already creating promo pieces because she thought it might be a really great idea to promote and to raise funds. So all of this conspiring was going on, right?
That's
From
so cool.
From the other side of the veil and this side of the veil. And I think that oftentimes those are our ancestors tapping us on the shoulder, saying, pay attention. Oh, you're not going to pay attention? Well, let me keep moving. And I think Sean will pay attention. It's pretty astonishing, and it's a beautiful thing. I feel bad sometimes for people who don't understand that their ancestors really are very much alive.
I think the other piece of that, we have less distraction right now. Many people aren't working. We're not moving about like we have been. And so, personally, I think there's just more opportunity for us to hear what they have to say if we're open to that, as well as to have that experience with them, because we don't have as many distractions as we had previously.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. And I think it's giving us some time to start thinking about some of the harder questions when we have time to ourselves and when we want to, talk to the ancestors about some things, and maybe we start asking some questions about some difficult situations in our life, or maybe our own generational patterns. And why does life have to be like this for me? Why do I have to carry on this tradition, as Hank Williams Jr. says, right? Why am I carrying on this tradition? Why does this have to be part of my life? And you were talking about that in our web meeting with our retreatants, Nicole, about epigenetics and taking a look at patterns, ancestral patterns and behaviors, and getting to the root cause of depression, melancholy, addiction. Where did that begin? What was it that set it all off? And those are some pretty deep conversations to have with our ancestors, aren't they?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think there is this summoning up that's happening in many of us, right? That, you've talked about the blood in our bones kind of waking up and stirring us, that are, summoning up this need to heal it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how I want to word this, but just like as part of this awakening and consciousness that is happening, is doing our part to contribute,
Mm-hmm.
and moving forward differently. So I think so many people are here seeking a deeper meaning in their generational patterns.
Mm-hmm. Right. And sometimes in our generational uniqueness, I know when I was younger, I would have given just about anything for somebody to explain to me why I was able to see people who are supposedly dead, right? Why can I see these people? Obviously, nobody in my adoptive family can see them. I know that I can see them. And where is that coming from? Is it a gift? Is it a curse? Is it generational? Did I get it from my mom, from my dad? And, at the very least, when we learn where the generational patterning in all sorts of things, gifts and things that don't feel much like gifts, once we understand, right, that it's a generational pattern, it's a part of the blood, it's part of the ancestry, there's a moment when we can say, okay, now I understand where it came from. I can understand where it began. Where did my addiction begin? Where did that come from? And once I find out who maybe, where the pattern began and with whom, what was it? What was the trauma?
Yeah.
What generational trauma am I carrying that I'm numbing myself to? We all can do it in many, many ways. And understanding that, I think that's one of the greatest conversations we can have with our ancestors about the meaning of life. And what does this mean in my life that I can see dead people and other people can't see them? What does it mean that I have an addiction to this? Or what does it mean that I have bipolar depression? And I think that we can begin to have compassion for ourselves and for others when we can trace back and really begin to see the larger picture of what took place. I mean, Nicole, as a therapist, in your experience, do you feel that the generational patterns that maybe need some healing, that do need healing, so that we don't continue to pass that proclivity along, does it typically begin with a trauma somewhere in our ancestral line?
I think that it does. And I think, especially if you're looking, like, let's say at abuse or something, and knowing, a young child who is being physically abused by dad's got out of control anger issues, maybe some drinking, and how that can come up to play. And then as that child grows up, realizing going from victim to maybe wanting to be the abuser, mm-hmm. right? And then all of a sudden recognizing oneself and the person that abused them, and the trauma that can then instill on that person, and becoming the abuser or wanting to be, and the shift there of like, wow, what happened to dad that made him so angry and, physically abusive, and where did that start from? And these things can live on. I mean, they live on in our DNA, but then through our experiences as well, and some of the things can be more subconscious. So, being someone that's trying to seek understanding and clarity, bringing that the subconscious conscious, to really start to develop a relationship with it, so that the subconscious can drive our thoughts and behaviors less. And if it starts somewhere and we can start to give like voice to it, language to it, experience to it, it no longer sits in the bottom of our psyche, in that subconscious space.
Mm-hmm. I was watching a show the other day, to your point, about triplets that were given up at birth.
Right.
And have you ever seen this one, Cad, where they were given up for birth in New York and placed in a scientific study on purpose in the early 70s, I believe it was. Or no, it was in the 60s. And they were placed purposefully in 3 very different families from different socioeconomic communities,
Wow. Wow.
and were monitored. They were monitored by psychiatrists to see whether it was environment or essentially ancestry that would dictate how they lived and how they got through life. And when one of the triplets went off to college, he met somebody there in the college yard who said, "Well, hey, so and so, it's good to see you back." And he looked at him and said, "What are you talking about?"
Interesting.
So he met one of his identical triplets there at university. And eventually somebody saw the 2 of them being reunited in the newspaper, and the 3rd triplet entered into the picture, only to discover that they had all been monitored their entire life. And there's now a documentary, a feature film out about the 3 of them. But one of the pervasive repeating patterns for all 3 of them, who were placed in very different homes, was depression.
Interesting. Yeah.
And as it turns out, it had nothing to do with environment. It was everything to do with genetics and exactly what we're talking about tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Some of life's greatest answers really do lie in our blood and bones and in the intelligence, the information contained. And mining that out in a good way, I think sometimes takes a whole team of people. Don't you, Cad?
Yeah. And it's a question I have for you, Dana, because I experienced this as an adopted child as well. How was it for you as you grew up? Feeling, did you feel like you were very different than the family you were brought into?
Absolutely. Yes.
And how did you make sense of that? Or could you make sense of it?
I didn't really make sense of it. And to be perfectly honest, I loved my evenings alone growing up in middle school and high school, because I would sit in my bedroom, as a lot of teenagers do. But at that time in my life, I was able to see spirit, and they would come to me, and I drew their faces, and I kept those drawings, and I kept them in a folder in my desk in my bedroom, and I couldn't explain it to everybody.
Right.
But it was as though I was drawing family photos, and the faces of the people who came through really became something of a family album for me.
Interesting. Yeah.
And I remember particularly drawing a picture. It was a charcoal of Kicking Bear. And as Kelly Spencer remembers seeing all of these, and I had no way of knowing any of these people at that time. So for me, I surrounded myself with my ancestors, not even knowing that I was doing that, and yet I was. And I knew that I was different. I was very different.
Yeah.
And they knew I was different and loved me anyway, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I think for myself, one of the things that it showed me, as we kind of commented on the fact that even though you can be placed in a very pure, loving family, that you still might not feel like you fit in. And for me, that kind of, I think as I got older, it kind of became more prominent for me as I was always kind of like, why do I feel like I'm so different?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I always knew I was adopted, but it was always kind of this feeling like I'm different. You know, I'm different, and different didn't necessarily at that time mean to me that it was a bad thing. It was just I recognized that who I was somehow maybe tied to something that was different than what this family was experiencing. So
Yeah. I remember going to my very first powwow in Grand Rapids, Michigan. It was the Three Fires powwow there at Riverside Park. And both of the kids were they were toddlers at the time. And I remember wanting to be there for the opening, the grand entrance. I had never been to one, but with all of my soul, I wanted to be there. And so Steve and I took the kids, and I can still remember it to this very day, the moment the drum started. And you both know I am not somebody who cries in public. I very, very rarely cry in even a small group of people. I stood there and I wept. And Steve looked at me and he said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "My soul.
yeah,
You're watching my soul cry."
yeah.
And he had seen all of the drawings that I had done in my teenage years. And he said, "Then maybe your relatives are letting you know this is where you belong."
Yeah.
So there are sometimes, Nicole mentioned it earlier, and you did too, Kat, our ancestors draw us closer to them rather than we ask them to draw close. Sometimes we have to pay attention to where our soul is drawn
Absolutely.
rather than thinking that we can direct it all. Sometimes we have to follow directions from our ancestors. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I like you bringing that out, because I think part of finding meaning in those difficult times that are really, really painful involves kind of this realization that, in those darkest moments, we can find our strengths, our purpose, our resiliency. And so how knowing that there might be some greater force there that is ancestral, that's pushing us, summoning us, right, to heal, to journey through for that purpose of healing, and potentially healing a whole lineage behind us and in front of us, ancestrally.
Right. Earlier when I was talking and Kevin Spencer and I were sharing, he and I going to that place in the Underground Railroad there at the inn in New Hampshire. And I said to him, "Kevin, do you want to go downstairs?" It was the end of the Underground Railroad here in New Hampshire. And he kind of looked at me for a moment, because once you tap into the ancestors that way, right, then they really begin to speak to you about life. And when he and I went down there in the underground there at the Bellows Walpole Inn, and we stood at the doorway where the slaves were kept before they were taken to the underground that went underneath the Connecticut River and to the other side. We both felt the energy of the ancestors wanting to talk, and one of the ancestors did step through. And, in that moment, and knowing that I have ancestors who were slaves, plantation slaves, to connect in that way, on one hand, is sad to know that the life they lived was that life. And on the other hand, knowing that you're alive, and knowing that they're in your blood and in your bones, they made it.
Yeah.
And here you are, and you gather your strength from that.
Yeah.
There are so many, when we ask for the meaning of life and what's going on, and Del Marie is saying, her ancestors say to her, "We told you life is going to be hard. This life is not meant for ninnies." We can all agree on that. And when our ancestors draw us, like, being drawn to that place, and for Kevin and I to meet up like that, and he had never experienced the Underground Railroad before. And to go down there and to experience that together, and to experience the spirit of that woman who came to speak to us. Those are profound moments. And have either of you ever had the feeling that you are one of your ancestors, or you were one of your ancestors that you know about?
I haven't. No. That's kind of an interesting concept. I've never thought of that.
What about you, Nicole?
I mean, I've wondered. I talk about my great grandparents were from Hungary. My paternal great grandparents, and I have this like just special affinity for like homeopathic remedies and like alternative health, and I always joke with my concoctions that it's my Hungarian grandmother. And whether that's true or not, I don't know, but like I just feel like I just feel this really big sense of my Hungarian grandmother. I don't know.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's
Interesting.
completely possible.
Yeah, I agree with that. Sometimes I look at my grandson, Easton, and I think to myself, I wonder when he's going to reveal who he was last time. I remember with Elise, when she was, 2 years old, she got mad at me at the dinner table. And because I had corrected her, she was eating like a little, I don't know what she was eating, like a raccoon digging out of the garbage or something. I don't know. And I just looked at her and I said, Elise, you can try to eat like a little lady. And she put her little spoon down and she looked up at me and sat up and she said, the last time around when I was your mother, I didn't talk to you like that. And I looked at her and I thought, oh my. And she said, I would never have talked to you like that when I was your mother.
Oh.
Boom.
Yes, and I looked at her very indignant and I said, well, Elise Marie, this time around I'm your mother. But she still tries to act as though she's my mother, even in this day. And I'll remind her, remember, this time around, I'm your mother. So I haven't quite figured out, which mother-daughter combination we were in the lineage, but she presented that to me when she was 2 years old.
Wow.
Yeah.
And it just reminds me with my father, I've always felt like his mother. Like I know I was his mother somewhere along the line.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting, and then to have these experiences where Elise is now the daughter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, or I am now the daughter.
Yeah, you kind of have one of those in your household.
Well, and I'm thinking when I was pregnant, my two biggest pregnancy cravings, one was hard beer and like dark beer.
Uh-huh.
And I wanted to smoke like a cigar, and I'm like, who is this little girl? Is it just this like German woman or what?
Wow.
What's going on?
So it'll be interesting to see as she comes of age if she takes up beer drinking and cigar smoking.
Oh no, that's funny.
It was like a pipe or something. Yes.
It could happen.
It could happen.
Yeah. And isn't it astonishing too, and Cad, you and I have talked about this, that we have relatives in this lifetime who maybe aren't from the bloodline, but they come from the soul line.
Yeah.
And Del Marie is saying, Easton is an ancient one, and we will get the story. With Elise, she has quite an affinity for her Auntie Del. And she looks forward to Auntie Del coming here every time because Del takes the time to teach her how to cook. And I always find it beautiful and I guess just beautiful when we meet people for the very first time and we can look at them, we can feel them, and something within us says, I know that person, I know their soul. Have you ever had that, Nicole?
Yes. Profound. People in my life early on, I felt that in just meeting, like you, Cad, a lot of people in my spiritual circle, just this innate sense of knowing, that kindred spirit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's powerful.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever had that happen, Cad?
Yeah, it's interesting. and mine isn't um, necessarily a human person, as much as my four-legged that is here with me, Max.
Aw.
I am certain that in some way we had a lifetime together before. I don't know what it was, and I don't know if it was human and four-legged at that time, but there's definitely a very deep connection. And I remember the first time I saw him at the animal shelter, I knew that I needed to be his dad. And so, yeah, it's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I've had those experiences with my animals, and I could talk about them, but people would think I have completely lost my mind. When some of the conversations that go on, and some of them right out loud. Well, I will share one. Years ago, my Gabriel, my West Highland Jack Russell Terrier, he could be a challenge because that's who he is. And, but he's also very, very kind of clingy to me in his challenge. And one night, everybody, you know me, and hopefully you don't think I'm too nutty. I heard a little boy saying to me, "Mama, please wake up. I've got to go potty." Just like I'm talking to you. And I woke up and I thought, well, that's not Dane's voice. He's a teenager. That's not who is talking to me. And I heard it again, right out loud. "Mama, please wake up. I need to go to the bathroom. I got to go potty." And I looked over and Gabriel's face was in my face. And I had to sit there with that for about a half a second because I never was taught that in catechism, let's just say. And I took him out and he did his business and he came back in. And I really started to think about this idea of souls and how our souls can change configuration. And sometimes I believe old souls do come back wearing fur and feathers and that kind of a sort of a thing. And I remember sitting and having a conversation with my brother Guy, Dull Knife. And we were at the community center there and we were having lunch. Del, you were there. And I asked him about that question. And I said, "Guy, when we pass on, is it possible for us to pass on and be an animal?" And he said, "Well, yeah, that's oftentimes what happens before we come back as a human. Sometimes we come back as an animal for a short while." Yeah. And I had this whole long conversation with him about that, and I thought, okay, something new to think about, something new to ponder. Yeah. And it felt really good talking to him about it. Yeah, and sometimes animals give us the best advice about life anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm thinking about my cat who's 21 and a half. She just, she's held such sacred space for me over the last 21 and a half years, and how grateful I am to her, and knowing, we've got to be kindred spirits there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Holly Hagen is saying, "I believe you. I've heard and spoke to animals as well." Yeah, animal communication is quite something. And I think that some people have an innate sense of being able to do that, especially a lot of sensitive people, spiritually sensitive. And I think a lot of children have that capability until it's either squashed by somebody or they decide that, it's childish or what have you. But I think that communicating with our ancestors and even animals is something that we innately do. And one of the things I find fascinating are young children who are born who can look at a photograph of somebody that they've not met in this incarnation and they can tell you who they are.
Yep.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I've had clients come to me and say, "How is it possible for my 2-year-old or my 3-year-old to know the name of that relative in that photo and they've never met them?" Yeah. So my question to the both of you is, how do you feel about the ancestors being with the souls of our to be born children until they are born?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very real.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, kind of, if we're all kind of derivatives to the same like soul family in some way, and then the souls incarnating, that preparation, the support,
Hmm.
things that go on before they're birthed into this world.
Hmm. I've always had this idea, and the older that I get, the more it's proven itself out that before we incarnate, we are with our ancestors who are there helping to prepare the way for us to come here and to find the appropriate family and parents
Yep.
for this journey to happen. I mean, what say you, Cad?
No, I think that makes perfect sense. It just, um, I mean, it just makes sense to me.
Hmm.
I can't say anything more than that.
Yeah. Linda Griezak is saying, Dana, remember when we were on the reservation going to powwow and pulled up next to a car and I looked over and I saw a lady and I said, I know her. That's Sifik. I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, she just knew in her soul that she knew her.
yeah.
And I think that that's the reason why we are drawn to people. Our souls know one another. And I believe that before we even arrive here, our ancestors are helping to prepare us to be here. And for some, the remembrance of their names is very present in their memory. And I love it when parents and grandparents and aunties and uncles allow children to express those things. You know, how do you know that? How do you know that person? Well, they were with me. I remember them. I mean, Cad,
Yeah.
you're a pediatric nurse practitioner, and you're
Yep.
also you're a shaman. And so you see babies arriving on this earth plane. You care for them. I mean, you were there when Easton was in the NICU uh,
Yeah.
earlier this year, and you have one of the most amazing way with children I have ever witnessed. It is so innate in you to nurture babies, children, people. And do you ever feel as though some of the babies that you meet are old souls coming in?
Oh, sure. Yeah. You know, it's interesting because there's numerous times when I'm taking care of kids at the hospital, and I'll walk into a room and the child will lock eyes with me, and
Hmm.
there's this sense of knowing between them and I, but it's not necessarily knowing on a level of maybe an ancestor, but that they've been here before,
Hmm.
um, that they are seeing more and experiencing more than what is just happening here and now. So that happens to me many times, and you know when I see when I walk through the area where the kids um, that are that have cancer, um, to watch them as they experience that disease, many of them. Um, um, there's just this kind of sense that they've gone through something like this before. They've been here before. They kind of know what this is about. They're not fearful. They're dancing in the halls or whatever. And yes, they have their ups and downs, but they've met this challenge before. So yeah, I see that a lot in the hospital.
And, you know, as part of your job, I know that you're also with children when they do pass from physical life to spirit. And when you are in the presence of that sacred moment, do you also feel ancestors or an energy gathering?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, um, yeah, I spent eight years of my career in peds oncology, and it's a very sacred experience to be there with the family, with the child, and and yes, there have been times where I've sensed that someone is there to take the child to the next life, and so yeah, it's it's an over it really it's an overwhelming experience for me. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that we are the ancestors. I feel as though we've been the ancestors. We're the ancestors here again. And Lily, Nicole, you are certainly not broken. You're one of the oldest souls that I know. You're a very old soul, very gifted, sensitive, and seer. I would never use the word broken for you in any form whatsoever. And I feel as though sometimes we get answers from the ancestors that pop up as intuitions in our mind, that pop up as thoughts that become pervasive, because I feel sometimes the ancestors really do answer us from within our own bodies. And I feel as though the ancestors, when they come to us as our ancestral totems and allies to help us sort this out, this life that we're living, I feel that we are so deeply connected to them that sometimes we are them, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely.
Yeah. And when it comes to, discussing with our ancestors life meaning, I think that when we decide, okay, we're going to hitch a ride and we're going to do this earth plane thing, we're feeling all puffy and we got the machismo going on and we got this. And then we get here and it's like, oh crap. Right? And so I love the word summon for a whole lot of reasons. I love that word summon. So we have to summon from within us strength, courage, resilience, laughter, sense of humor about things, maybe some compassion. We have to summon that. And I think that I feel that, I know that what we're summoning is already within us.
Yeah.
And I find that to be a really comforting thought.
Yeah. I remember Amantha saying something to me during one of our first times together, which I thought was an interesting statement. She said to me that when I was birthed into this world, the first thing I did was gasp.
Mm-hmm.
And she said it was like I realized where I had left and was coming into this different place. Thinking, wow, that's kind of an interesting statement to make.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and when you think back on it, it makes perfect sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah. Joseph Campbell is right about another thing too, Nicole. This is the hero's journey.
Mm-hmm.
Holly Hagen is saying, sometimes I think my advisor on the other side was drinking when they were helping me to plan my next trip down the chute.
Right. We were feeling good. When
somebody's got some splaining to do somewhere at the end of this row that I'm hoeing. That's all I got to say. Somebody better have some really good answers.
Yeah.
Oh goodness.
So needing that reminder, right, of why we're here and what was I thinking, like for real, like remind me what I was thinking, because times are tough and there is pain, and so we need that to help us keep on keeping on.
That's right. Keep on and keeping on. That's where you get really good friends and soul family members. And, that's why Lily has a permanent bedroom in my home, right? So when my little sister comes to visit, she has her own space in this house, and I keep the buffalo robe there for my Cheways when they come to visit, and they sleep under the buffalo robe. And pretty soon, what I love about this life is the fact that family becomes, and it's ever becoming. It's always becoming. And in that, we're informing our blood and our bones. We're always informing our blood and our bones. And it's what we carry on. And, for me, and Cad, you can speak to this as well from your perspective. I think one of the greatest gifts that being adopted has given my children is an expanded view of family.
Sure, absolutely. Yep.
Because the definition goes beyond the word ancestor. It speaks to nurturing and learning and challenging and all of those things. And I believe then that becomes part of generational patterning.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that, Nicole?
Yeah, I think it does, because we're always broadening what we know. And I heard someone talking too about just when we take on these relationships that are like family, there is some kind of energetic line that is established.
Totally.
So it might not be the bloodline, but there's an energetic line there that's just as powerful.
Right. When Cad and I were down in Decatur, remember, Cad, when Tandika came up and she looked at you and I and she said,
"Oh yeah,
are you two roommates, or what's with you two?"
Yeah.
So clearly she felt something.
Yeah.
And I said, well, he's my brother from another mother. And she wasn't intimating that we were lovers or partners or any of that. She's like, are you two roommates? What's with you two?
Yeah. Well, and I think I have shared with you previously that when I was doing my ancestry, it said to me that I needed to refer to someone in the King family.
You gotta love that.
Oh, that's interesting.
That's cool.
It's outstanding.
Yeah.
I remember we were somewhere with Elise. Lily and I were with Elise. Maybe it was at the golf course. It was at the golf course. So it was me and Lily. We were dropping something off for Elise. And Elise, a coworker walked in and said, well, who's this? And Elise said, yeah, that's my mom. Real quick, yeah, that's my mom. This is my Aunt Lily. And it was the way that she said it. Oh, well, that's cool. Like, yeah, that's my mom. But this is my Aunt Lily. And the patterning of that, and the blue elephant, as you know, Cad, Easton is so fond of his blue elephant. Well, I'm going to go get Uncle Cad's elephant. And the list goes on and on and on about how all of you have become my children's family. And the gift in that is that it becomes part of the memory of the bloodline, which I think is spectacular.
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. Lily saying she sure did. Yeah, I was like chopped liver, and Lily was the feature. Oh, goodness. So with that, everybody, we're actually after the top of the hour. So final thought for the evening, Cad?
No, I just everyone stay healthy and be open to what your ancestors have to say to you.
I love that. Nicole?
Yeah, back to those empowering questions of, what you might be needing, and asking, what is it that I need to know, or share with me the gifts that I need to get through this day. And not being afraid of finding joy in that either, right? Because even though times are tough, as you were saying, just the importance of laughter and joy and friendship and all of those things.
Yeah. Sharpening those toenails, Lily, and painting them black. I'm pretty sure that was Moira Rose inspired, by the way, those toenails. I love Moira Rose and her, her part in The Crows Have Eyes. But with that, right, I think sense of humor is also something that we inherit.
Yeah.
But with that, also allow your ancestors to take you on a trip
Yeah.
and follow their lead, because it's an extraordinary time to follow their lead and see where it is that they're taking you. So with that, everybody, have a beautiful evening. Get out there and shine. Cad, Nicole, have a gorgeous evening yourselves.
Thank you as well. Thanks, everyone.
Good night, everybody.